Hey everyone, it's the Midnight Pulse, and today I've got a story that still gives me chills whenever I think about it. This happened to me a few years ago when I was working as a truck driver in Texas. I've been driving trucks for about 4 years now, and I've seen my fair share of strange things on the road. But nothing like this. It was a routine delivery, just like any other. I was hauling a load of furniture across the state, and the route took me through some pretty remote areas. You know the kind of place I'm talking about. Long, empty stretches of highway, no streetlights, and nothing but darkness for miles. I'd been driving for hours, and the fatigue was starting to set in. My coffee had gone cold, and the radio was just static at this point. That's when I saw it for the first time. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a figure standing on the side of the road. It was just a dark, human-like shape, barely visible in the glow of my headlights. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe it was a hitchhiker or someone whose car had broken down. As I drove past, I glanced in the rearview mirror out of habit. The figure was there, but it was moving away, shrinking into the distance as my truck rolled forward. Nothing unusual, right? A few miles later, I saw it again. This time, it was on the opposite side of the road. My heart skipped a beat. It was the same figure, standing perfectly still, facing the highway. I couldn't see any details. No face, no clothes, just a dark silhouette. I drove past, trying to shake the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. I looked in the rearview mirror again. The figure was there, but just like before, it was moving away, growing smaller as I drove forward. I told myself it was nothing, just a coincidence. Maybe it was a signpost or a tree stump. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The road stretched on, empty and silent. I kept driving, trying to focus on the hum of the engine and the rhythm of the road. But after a while, I started to feel off. Like something was behind me, watching me. It was a prickling sensation at the back of my neck, a cold weight in my chest. I tried to ignore it, but the feeling grew stronger, more insistent. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I glanced in the rearview mirror. My blood ran cold. The figure was there, but this time, it wasn't moving away. It was standing in the middle of the road, a small distance behind my truck. It was just a dark silhouette, human-like but featureless, perfectly still. I stared at it, my heart pounding, my hands gripping the wheel tightly. I pressed the gas pedal harder, the engine roaring as I sped up. I kept glancing in the mirror, hoping the figure would disappear. But it didn't. It was still there, always the same distance behind me, no matter how fast I drove. I tried to stay calm, telling myself it was just a trick of the light or my exhausted brain playing games. But every time I looked in the mirror, the figure was still there, unmoving, watching. Sometimes it would disappear, and I'd feel a flicker of relief. But then, moments later, it would reappear, always in the same spot, always the same distance away. It didn't matter how fast I drove or how many turns I took. It was always there, silent and relentless. By the time I reached the truck stop, I was a nervous wreck. My hands were shaking as I turned off the engine, and I sat there for a moment, staring at the mirror. The figure was gone. I climbed out of the truck, my legs wobbly, and headed inside. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the smell of stale coffee filled the air. The truck stop was quiet, with only two other drivers sitting at a table in the corner. They looked tired, their faces worn and their eyes heavy, like they'd been driving for days without rest. One of them was sipping coffee, staring blankly at the wall, while the other was leaning back in his chair, his cap pulled low over his eyes. I ordered a cup of coffee and sat down at a table near them, trying to calm my nerves. I wanted to ask them if they'd ever seen anything strange on the road, if they knew what the figure was. But I couldn't bring myself to speak. They seemed so normal, so grounded, like they hadn't just been chased by a shadowy figure for miles. I sat there in silence, sipping my coffee and glancing at the door every few seconds, half expecting the figure to walk in. But nothing happened. The two drivers eventually got up, nodded at me, and left without a word. When I finally went back to my truck, I hesitated before climbing in. I glanced at the mirror, half expecting to see the figure again. But it was still gone. I started the engine and pulled back onto the highway, telling myself it was over. The road was empty, and the night was quiet. For the first time in hours, I felt a flicker of relief. But as I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I kept checking the mirror, my heart pounding every time I glanced up. The figure never reappeared, but the fear stayed with me. Even now, years later, I still check the mirror every time I drive at night. I tell myself it was just my imagination, just a trick of the light. But deep down, I know what I saw. And I know I'll never forget it. Hit that subscribe button if you love scary stories that keep you up at night.